After the 1988 title, the atmosphere within the McLaren team was one of peace. Both Senna and Prost saw each other as strong adversaries, but there was no explicit atmosphere of war. Throughout the 1989 season, the situation changed, and it all began with the fateful San Marino GP that year. After allegedly breaking an agreement proposed by himself, Senna provoked Prost's anger, who then began to fiercely combat the Brazilian, both on and off the track. The rivalry that started that day fueled the following years of Formula One with one of the most impressive rivalries in the history of the competition. The San Marino Grand Prix was held at the Imola circuit in Italy and was named as such due to a mere commercial agreement. The Enzo and Dino Ferrari circuit was considered the second home of Ferrari and hosted the GP from April 21st to 23rd. The weather throughout the weekend was mostly dry, and the stands were mostly filled with tifosi, who expected another strong performance from the Italian team after the victory in Brazil. Despite the defeat in the first race, McLaren maintained absolute dominance in the category after crushing the competition a year earlier. The relationship between Senna and Prost was healthy, with tough but fair competition. After the Brazilian Grand Prix held in Jacarepaguá, Senna reportedly proposed an agreement to Prost. They would not attack each other in the first lap of the next races to avoid one or both of them exiting the race early. Prost agreed, and thus the team went to Imola days before to conduct tests before the race. In 8 days, the team tested the entire car, from aerodynamics to brakes and fuel consumption. Free practice sessions proceeded normally, with McLaren taking the top times as usual. Gabriele Tarquini was hastily called up at AGS to replace Philippe Strafe, who was seriously injured in an accident in Jacarepaguá. Due to the severity of the accident, the poor rescue and transportation conditions, Strafe became tetraplegic and could never race again. Tyrrell, on the other hand, debuted the 018 model, placing a car on the grid for Mikel Alboreto. His teammate Jonathan Palmer was left with the old model, the 017B. In pre-qualifying, which took place a day before the qualifying, the Brabhams were the fastest, with Stefano Modena and Martin Brundle leading the way. Alex Caffey secured the third spot, and the last one went to Nicola Larini from Osella. Bertrand Gachot, Gregor Foytek, Piercarlo Ginzani, Stefan Johansson, Joachim Winkelhock, Pierre-Henri Raffanel, Aguri Suzuki, Bernd Schneider, and Volker Weidler failed to qualify. In the qualifying, McLaren's tests showed results, with Senna on pole and Prost in second. Mansell appeared with his Ferrari in third, 1.6 seconds behind Prost, and closing the second row was Patrese from Williams. Completing the top 10 were Gerhard Berger with the other Ferrari in fifth, Thierry Boutsen, Alessandro Nannini, Nelson Piquet with the dreadful Lotus Judd in 8th, Alex Caffey, and Olivier Grouillard from Ligier in 10th. Before the start, Yannick Dalmas and Philippe Alliot's Lola had to retire due to electrical problems. As the green light lit up, Senna shot ahead with his teammate in second. Mansell tried to pass Prost at the Tamburello exit, but the Frenchman defended his position, and the Briton became the target of Patrese. Right behind were Berger in 5th and Boutsen in 6th, holding their positions. Still on the first lap, March's Ivan Capelli retired after spinning and hitting the wall at Rivazza. The race remained relatively calm until the 4th lap, when Berger went straight at Tamburello and crashed at over 200 km/h. As the race was still in its early stages, the Ferrari tank was still full, and with the impact, it ruptured. Given the severity of the accident and the speed, the entire car was doused in gasoline and caught fire. Boutsen later revealed that he saw Berger's front wing come loose moments before the accident, catastrophically reducing the car's downforce, causing it to go straight. The red flag was raised, and it took the firefighters 15.2 seconds to arrive and start fighting the fire, which lasted another 5 seconds. The race was stopped, and Berger emerged from the accident with broken ribs and second-degree burns on his hands, but was otherwise okay. Given the gravity of the situation, the race restarted an hour later in a standing procedure, and the final classification would result from the sum of the times from the first and second parts. With another 55 scheduled laps, the restart saw Prost performing better, overtaking Senna in the first few meters. Mansell couldn't replicate his initial start and ended up falling behind Patrese and Nannini. By the time they reached the Tosa corner, Senna put his car beside Prost's and passed him, regaining the lead. Once the duel was settled, the two began to set a strong pace against the rest of the field, which was racing separately. Grouillard was disqualified on lap 10 due to maintenance performed on the car during the red flag. On lap 11, it was Stefano Modena's turn to crash with his Brabham at the Rivazza arrival, after spinning similarly to Capelli. Mansell, Patrese, and Nannini continued to fight for third place, but the battle didn't last long. On lap 21, Williams had an engine problem, and Patrese had to retire. 2 laps later, it was Mansell's turn to have problems with the Ferrari, this time with the gearbox. Without the two, Nannini remained untouched in 3rd place until the finish line. Prost remained chasing Senna up front, but it was clear that the Frenchman didn't have the same pace as the Brazilian, and on lap 42, he spun by himself at the Variante Bassa. Piquet, who had been performing miracles with the Lotus, had to retire on lap 29 due to engine problems. 10 laps later, another Brazilian, Mauricio Gugel-Min, also retired, this time with a gearbox failure. Even with problems keeping up with Senna, Prost continued to crush the rest of the field, and by the end of the race, the 2 McLaren drivers had lapped all their opponents. The rest of the race was smoother, and without major issues, Senna won the race. Prost came 2nd, and Nannini closed the podium in 3rd. Boutsen, Warwick, Palmer from Tyrrell, Caffey, Tarquini with an excellent 8th place, Eddie Cheever and Andrea De Cesaris with the Dallara completed the top 10. Shortly after the race, Boutsen's Williams and Caffey's Dallara were disqualified due to irregular tire changes. The procedure was carried out during the red flag caused by Berger's accident, and in theory, no one was authorized to touch the cars. In reality, it was discovered that Italian officials had authorized the change, and the positions were returned to both teams. On the podium, there was an unusual scene. The champagne bottles weren't loosened to ease the celebration, forcing the drivers to make a final effort in the celebration. After the race, Alain Prost was furious, arguing that the agreement made before the race had been broken. 6 months earlier, a similar situation had occurred at the Portuguese GP, but the atmosphere between the two was still stable. For Prost, what happened in Imola was the last straw. Senna, on the other hand, justified himself by saying that the agreement didn't apply in the case of a restart, since the idea was not to overtake on the first lap, a situation that had already occurred. Prost didn't accept the excuse, and the situation within the team began to tense up. The problem was so serious that Ron Dennis called both of them for a meeting during tests at the Pembrey circuit in Wales. Ron was reportedly very harsh with the Brazilian, who allegedly burst into tears and apologized, but by then, the damage was done. In the following race in Monaco, Prost gave an angry interview to the French newspaper L'Équipe, explaining about the broken agreement. This publicly aired feud was the first of many between the two drivers, fueling their explosive rivalry. That year in particular, the competition ended controversially with an accident between the two during the Japanese GP, where Prost was crowned champion and Senna risked losing his super license. After the incident, the Frenchman changed teams, and the tension within McLaren dissipated. The feud between the two lasted until the mid-93s, at a time when Senna had a considerably inferior car to Prost's, who was about to leave F1. The public end of the feud happened in Adelaide, where Senna pulled Prost alongside him on the top of the podium, raising the Frenchman's hand. After the race, the two resumed contact and became friends, a friendship that unfortunately didn't have time to blossom the way everyone would have liked to see. If you enjoyed the video and want more information about Formula 1, IndyCar, and others, subscribe to the channel. Questions, suggestions, or tips are always welcome. Leave them in the comments below. Until next time!